It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Calhoun lecture. This is the third annual William H. Hunter Memorial Lecture, and for those of us that worked with Bill over the years, it's a very special time to remember a good friend. I remember when we started talking about lecture series a long time before we actually kicked it off. Bill used to be a regular at the Institute. He would stop by and he'd say, "I've got a great idea for a speaker." And I'd say, "Okay, let's write them a letter." And after he did this about a dozen times, I said, "Why don't you chair a lecture series?" And he embraced it. And he said, "And I've got a few friends that'll help out." And we're pleased to see so many of you here this evening to remember Bill and to honor him with this lecture. I want to point out Jane Hunter. And Jane, and to the rest of the Hunter family, it's always a pleasure to see you come by, and you're always a very welcome friend. The lecture is sponsored by those that call ourselves FOBs, Friends of Bill, and by the ANMed Health. And together, I think it's been quite a series when you think of Dr. Cash, Dr. Farmer, and tonight's lecture is going to be a rich legacy that comes down in Bill's name. There are a number of other guests I'd like to acknowledge this evening who are with us to hear Ms. Luray. The invitees of the Susan G. Komen Alliance and the upstate members of Komen are here. Would you just raise your hands? Just raise your hands, and thank you very much for coming. We have the members of the ANMed Health Organization, the doctors, nurses, friends, and administrators. Would you please raise your hands? Great. And we have a group called Bosom Buddies, and this is a cancer support network. So please, again, raise your hands. And thank you all for coming. And yes, yes, there. And if you have not seen it as you came in, there's an art display put on by the School of Nursing at Clemson University. So for the members of the School of Nursing, the nursing community at Clemson, please raise your hand. And thank you for that very inspirational display in the lobby. Please check it out before you leave this evening. Now, following Ms. Luray's presentation, we'll have an onstage discussion with Ms. Luray and two panelists. The panelists for this evening's discussions are Ms. Catherine Smith. Ms. Catherine Smith, where's Catherine? Oh, she's still in the back. Sorry. And Catherine's the executive director of the Cancer Association of Anderson. And the second speaker will be Dr. Kyle Bryans, and Dr. Bryans is Chief of Magnetic Resonance Imaging at ANMed, where she's worked at ANMed since 1995. She's a native of Iowa, and she received her medical degree from the University of Nebraska College of Medicine in Omaha, which is now under ice. So I bet she's pleased to be in South Carolina, but it's coming here in a couple days. So please welcome Dr. Bryans, who will introduce Ms. Luray.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kyle Bryans, and I'm a general radiologist and also a women's radiologist, and that's, I think, why it's important to be talking about this, especially in the light of healthcare reform and other kinds of political issues. I think we have to understand a little bit about what breast cancer advocacy is, and so it's exciting for me to introduce Jennifer Luray. She is the president of the Susan G. Komen for the Cure Advocacy Alliance and the vice president of government affairs and public policy. She's the leader of the Komen for the Cure's Washington, D.C. office, and she's the top liaison to the White House, Capitol Hill, and key policymakers on domestic and global health issues. Under her leadership, the Komen Advocacy Alliance advocates at all levels of government for increased funding for research and access to potentially life-saving screening and treatment programs for breast cancer. It's my pleasure to announce Jennifer Luray.
Good evening. I'm so relieved no one touched my papers. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and let me just say what a privilege it is to be here with you tonight at this esteemed university and in this wonderful setting. What a fabulous turnout. Thank you, Dr. Becker and Dr. Bryans, for that introduction. I have a special fondness for institutes and schools of public administration, especially one named after a U.S. Senator, because I worked in the U.S. Senate for 5 years. And also, public policy is my life. And it's a rewarding life, interesting and full of the opportunity to be a force for real change in this great country of ours. In here's where you learn the theory. Out there is where you make the change. Whether you're thinking of running for office, running a campaign, or doing what so many of us do in the public policy arena, laboring in relative obscurity 24/7, it seems, trying to make some change in the world. Those of you who are Clemson students and may be considering a career in public service are certainly doing so in interesting times. Times that challenge us, frustrate us, times that make us want to kick in the television every now and then, no matter which side of the political fence you happen to be leaning on. But in a lot of ways, these times are no different than times that have challenged us in the past, starting with a handful of folks upset about taxation without representation 250 years ago, and in cycles all the way up to today, when we continue to wrestle with fundamental, basic questions about our collective versus individual rights, the well-being of our citizens, and what responsibilities we have to one another. All of our country's great challenges have been, at their root, public policy questions, starting with the very basis for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Over time, as we wrestle with these tough public policy questions, for example, the role of government in education, when to regulate business, and now how to improve our health care, we reflect the kind of nation we want to be. And we also reflect the fact that there are very different views of opinion in our country, and they are expressed loudly. I will say, though, in spite of our frustration, it's safe to say that freedom of speech is alive and well in our country. Well, if all goes according to plan, when you leave Clemson, you will be involved in forming the policy that answers those questions. You will be the ones articulating and advocating for a vision that you believe in. And who knows, some of you here may be the great leaders who set a new course for the nation in years to come. Okay, I'll admit that I speak in lofty terms about public policy and advocacy, because as I said before, this is my life. Specifically, I've been involved in setting, or trying to set, with the help of many others, public policy on diverse issues in a state legislature, for members of Congress, and in the White House. And I've also been at the nexus of business and government when I represented Abbott Laboratories. I've worked on many different issues, but healthcare, and especially women's health, is particularly dear to me. It's an opportunity for me to join the personal and the professional. I can feel that every day I'm contributing to making the world a safer and healthier place for my 8-year-old daughter. Fortunately, her biggest health worry at the moment is when she's going to lose her next tooth. She's hoping it will finally be a molar. But on a more serious note, my father did die at 63 of esophageal cancer. He never had the opportunity to meet his granddaughter. So I have a particular passion about fighting and curing cancer. Today, as you've learned, I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Susan G. Komen for the Cure organization and head of Komen's Advocacy Alliance. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with us. Others may not be. I'll be giving a shout out soon to some of the leadership who are here from Komen in South Carolina. But for those of you who aren't familiar, let me tell you a little bit about who we are. And you saw the video at the beginning. I didn't intend it to be a Komen commercial, but between the great music and the crowd scenes, I think it gives you a sense of the passion that we bring to the table. We are today the world's largest organization dedicated to ending breast cancer. For those of you who will one day write a mission statement as part of your job, let me just say that ours is a pretty simple statement. We want to end breast cancer, period. Everything we do centers on that goal. If doing it were as easy as aspiring to it, our work would have been done a long time ago, but I suppose that's true of many things. Curing cancer isn't easy. It's hugely complicated, and I'm sorry to say that it will take a very long time. But with that said, I'm pleased to say that we are making some very impressive progress. Let me give you a little background on how we started and how far we've come in a very short 30 years. And the story of Komen is also the story of breast cancer in this country and breast cancer advocacy in this country. All Komen had at the beginning was a promise between two sisters, our founder, Nancy Brinker, and her sister, Susan G. Komen. Susie was 36 years old when she was diagnosed in 1980. And like so many women of that time, she was pretty much on her own with her diagnosis. There was no internet, no 1-800 numbers. There weren't many major breast cancer centers, and the federal government didn't fund very much in the way of breast cancer research. And worse yet, we didn't talk about the disease. Chances were that even your obituary wouldn't say you died of cancer. It would say you died of a long illness. Even in the late 1970s, 10 years after we had put a man on the moon, Nancy Brinker tells of old friends crossing the street when they saw her sister Susie coming because they were worried that they would catch her cancer. They thought it was contagious. I still find it hard to believe that this kind of attitude and belief existed in our country just one generation ago. But before she died, Susie asked Nancy to promise that she would do something about this so that no one would have to suffer, so that no family would have to suffer, as Susie's did. Not only from the cancer, but also from the ignorance and the isolation of the disease. So Nancy went back to Dallas, Texas, and started to do that. And it wasn't easy. She looked for funding. Companies said they didn't want their names associated with cancer. When she tried to put a notice in the paper about the first race for the cure in Dallas, the newspaper wouldn't print the words breast cancer. Well, you can see how things are different today. Today, of course, breast cancer awareness is everywhere. Today, companies are not shy about being associated with cancer or other health problems. In fact, it even has a name, corporate social responsibility. And today, a corporation that isn't involved in trying to solve some sort of problem, well, that corporation isn't very well thought of. And today, I'm pleased to say that our federal breast cancer research programs have been increased 30 times over and now total around $1 billion. That money, of course, is going all over the country at fine research institutions such as Clemson. And today, of course, we don't have the stigma and the isolation that women with breast cancer suffered just one generation ago. Today, Komen has grown from a handful of friends in Nancy's living room to the largest group of cancer activists in the world. We have more than 1.5 million people running and walking in our races, and more importantly, we've raised and invested more than $1.5 billion for research and for community health programs. We've agitated and advocated for more research funding and for programs that also ensure that when you get a mammogram, it's a quality mammogram, and to ensure access to screening and treatment for all women, especially those who are uninsured or underinsured. And today, the federal government and state governments stand up and take notice when cancer organizations like Komen speak. So how did we do it? How did we go from a living room in Dallas to the halls of Congress? How did we grow from a few hundred women at one race in Texas to more than 1.5 million people in more than 130 races around the world? Importantly, how did we change laws, change attitudes, and become a leading advocate? I wish I could tell you that we waved a magic wand and it just happened. But of course, nothing worthwhile is ever that easy. Like so many success stories, Komen's story is a story of determination and plain hard work. First, we didn't begin by thinking big, we began by thinking small. We didn't seek to change the world through one giant initiative. We sought to change the world through millions of small interactions. One race, one research grant, one corporate sponsor, one lawmaker, and one leaflet for breast education at a time. We started with one race. People saw that race and decided to become involved. They wanted to bring this work to their communities. And soon we had a network of 122 local affiliates across the country, raising funds and addressing the unique needs of the people in their towns. I should point out, when there is a race for the cure in your local area, the bulk of the money stays in that local area. Over time, the efforts of our affiliates have helped us return $900 million to community programs. mainly breast cancer screening and treatment. Last year alone, Komen funded 500,000 breast cancer screenings, the very screenings that diagnose breast cancer early and can save lives. We provided education and awareness to 4 million people and helped more than 1,900 organizations provide real help for people with breast cancer. We even help buy groceries for women in treatment, for example. We provide cab fare so that women can get to their doctor's appointments. And in a very sad sign of the times, we've helped a growing number of women deal with their cancer without insurance or without enough insurance to cover their care. Those who lost their jobs or whose husbands lost their jobs. And good luck finding a new insurance plan after you've received a cancer diagnosis. From the very beginning, we knew that finding a cure for cancer meant funding research. And again, we started small with just one grant for $28,000 in the early 1980s. But since then, we've funded research that has helped us to understand the nature of the disease, how it starts, research that's been responsible for breakthroughs in treatment, like Herceptin, research that's helped us achieve a 98% 5-year survival rate for cancer that's caught early. That's up from a 74% rate when we started our work. And we did it by building partnerships with healthcare providers, cancer researchers, government agencies, and non-government agencies. We reached out to companies to help them overcome their aversion to being associated with breast cancer. And again, many of these interactions started small. A businessman joining us to support an employee or a spouse with breast cancer, for example. We did it also by starting the conversation. Over time, Komen's outreach and our influence has moved us from a society where the words breast cancer couldn't be said on TV to a society where professional athletes wear pink during games, where NASCAR cars are painted pink, where celebrities are on television and the internet sharing their breast cancer stories publicly, and where breast cancer information and support is available in abundance. This past October, there were several stories that said, is there too much pink? Is there too much talk about breast cancer awareness? It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. People are getting tired of it. And you know what? We're the envy of the world over, because in many countries, there's still an incredible stigma associated with breast cancer. And at Komen, we believe that you really can't have too much pink. Let me talk a little bit about advocacy. At the grassroots, at the grass tops, and in our communities, in state legislatures, on Capitol Hill, and at the White House, and most recently, in capitals around the world. Well, it's fair to say that we didn't start off with a sophisticated lobbying machine. We saw the need, and we figured we had to do something, so we forged ahead on our own. We've been successful in lobbying for not only for increased access to federal funds for research, but also cancer screening for low-income women through a very important program run by the Centers for Disease Control. Most of that money comes back to local areas. Our advocates have also ensured that when you get a mammography, it's of high quality. And if you're on Medicaid, just because you're poor, you're also going to have access to high-quality medicine. And 2 years ago, because we recognize the importance of advocacy to our core mission, we created the Komen Advocacy Alliance, which is a 501c4 organization based in Washington, D.C. A 501c4 is a special nonprofit tax status that allows a nonprofit group to be more active at the legislative level. But our grassroots are the ones most critical to the fight. And as the former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, said, all politics is local. The way I look at it is there are two sides to the policy coin. First, you have the legislative process and the policy that addresses the issue. Second, you have the people who make it happen. And I'm excited to share with you examples of passionate people affecting change. Today, our advocates are 250,000 strong, and they're busy fighting, unfortunately, at this very moment in state capitals across the country, to continue funding for programs that are threatened by state budget cuts. In 2009, before the economy cratered, those advocates had secured more than $72 million in state funding for breast cancer screening programs. They traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with their members of Congress, and last year, more than 300 representatives from across the country came and had 400 meetings with different decision makers in Congress. We send letters to elected officials, and to date, Komen advocates have sent nearly 60,000 letters to Congress, highlighting the needs of cancer patients in healthcare reform. The reason I emphasize the numbers is the old adage is very true in Washington and in state capitals: the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We're letting our voices be heard. During the presidential campaign, more than 100,000 activists signed our I Vote for the Cure petition, encouraging the candidates to make cancer a top priority. But it was here, in your state of South Carolina, that we probably had one of the best examples of the power of grassroots advocacy starting 4 years ago, when our affiliates launched a successful campaign to expand access to breast cancer treatment for low-income women and others who lack insurance. The following year, we were able to garner a first-time state appropriation of $2 million for screening services through a program called the Best Chance Network. But last year, these vital programs were in danger of being cut. We swung into action and mobilized our grassroots, and we were ultimately successful in preserving funding. Our South Carolina affiliates added more soldiers to the fight, teaming up with the South Carolina Cancer Alliance and the American Cancer Society. They stayed in close touch with the screening program, the Best Chance Network, and worked with the South Carolina Department of Health. They did the old-fashioned hard work of advocacy, collecting signatures for petitions, writing op-eds for the newspaper, enlisting allies in the legislature, knocking on doors, conducting media interviews, writing letters to decision makers and power brokers, engaging activists online, working the phones, testifying before the committees. So when Governor Sanford presented a budget without this $2 million in funding and cuts to treatment, they could have taken that as a defeat, but they didn't. They just worked harder. They found more legislative allies. They worked the media a little bit stronger. They had more people write letters. They worked the relationships that they had had at the State House, and at the end of the day, they delivered a victory to the women of South Carolina. This is a remarkable story of breast cancer advocates turning their passion into policy. I would like to commend our South Carolina affiliates and the other organizations for these amazing efforts. Wonderful work, folks. And I should point out that our upstate affiliate has a new name, the Midland to Mountains affiliate of Susan G. Komen for the Cure. Representatives of the affiliate have joined us this evening. Thank you, Krista, Lindsay, and Diana for making the trip. And we have another wonderful affiliate in Charleston called the Low County affiliate. Together, these affiliates have invested millions of dollars in South Carolina programs this decade and have reached tens of thousands of women with their message of early detection. This is wonderful, life-saving work that you're doing, and the women and families of South Carolina are in your debt. On behalf of the activists here from Komen and the other cancer groups, I'd like to have a round of applause. I should point out that this story of advocacy is being repeated throughout our network. In Nevada, our advocates fought to preserve cancer care when the state closed a major outpatient treatment center for cancer patients that served as a safety net. In California, advocates are fighting to reopen the doors to clinics where screening services have actually been cut until July 1st. As I've said, when you have a $40 billion budget, cutting $10 million in breast cancer screening is probably not a smart policy move. And on the federal level, our network is actively engaged in making sure that screening standards remain intact for women in their 40s. A quasi-governmental task force said before the end of the year that it may not be necessary for women in their 40s to be screened. We disagree because 17% of breast cancer cases occur in women in their 40s, and many of those are found through routine mammograms. So we want to be sure that the government and private insurers continue to cover them. We're also working on legislation to bring breast health education for younger women and their providers, for access to clinical trials, patient navigation, streamlining the research process so that the time between the basic research and the medical clinic is shortened. And we've been active in the healthcare reform debate to ensure that the needs of cancer patients are being considered as the legislation is developed. And internationally, we've also been focused on public and private partnerships that will bring breast cancer screening and treatment to the poorest countries. Countries where women face losing their families or end up being shunned for simply having breast cancer. Countries where there may be just one mammogram unit for several million people, or where women don't know enough about breast health to even seek medical treatment early if they can find it. Okay, I'll brag just a bit and say that Komen is the only major breast cancer group that attacks this mission from all fronts. Not just research, not just advocacy, not just community support, not just international outreach, but all of it simultaneously. And it's been a very effective approach. Today, survival rates from breast cancer are much higher. I mentioned the near 100% 5-year survival rate for localized breast cancer. Our chief scientific advisor, Dr. Eric Weiner, tells us that today we're curing 75% of the breast cancers that we're treating, curing them. We're honing in on the more aggressive cancers that we haven't figured out yet, and we're adding urgency to this process by funding research that, as I said earlier, brings treatments from the lab to the bedside more quickly. And today we have a greater understanding of the factors that may lead to breast cancer, helping women understand their risks and take steps to avoid cancer later in their lives. We're looking at ways to prevent breast cancer entirely, funding research to find out the role of environmental or lifestyle factors in breast cancer. And we've virtually erased the stigma and isolation that once surrounded breast cancer in this country. Now, I don't know about you, but I think all this progress is pretty astounding. But there is still so much more work to be done. 200,000 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer this year alone, just in our country, and 40,000 will die. Worldwide, more than 1.3 million women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. Almost 500,000 will die. And we still face major issues, aggressive cancers, for example, and racial, geographic, and socioeconomic barriers to care. We're very interested in understanding how breast cancer develops in different groups of women. We know, for example, that African American women are less likely to develop breast cancer, but when they do, they're more likely to die from it. They tend to develop more aggressive cancers, and they are frequently not diagnosed until those cancers have developed. And we know that Latino women also tend to be diagnosed at later stages, and we want to know why that is. We intend to keep breast cancer issues front and center in the minds of our elected officials, in state houses, in Congress, and across the country. And I hope that some of you will consider joining us, because breast cancer is by no means cured. 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with this disease. 1/3 of American women still don't have access to basic screening. The screening we do have isn't optimal. It still misses many cancers. Breast cancer is still the leading killer of women between the ages of 40 and 60, and breast cancer screening and treatment programs are under assault from tight budgets. And we still do not, in my view, spend enough on breast cancer research. And that's why my organization, as we enter our 4th generation, will continue the fight. But we can use all the foot soldiers we can get. So please consider joining us. Go to KomenAdvocacy.org. You can become a fan of the Komen Advocacy Alliance on Facebook. We also tweet, or consider becoming involved with a Komen affiliate here in South Carolina. Our nearest affiliate is in Greenville, and the executive director is here tonight. If nothing else, go to our website to get educated about your own breast health. Remind your moms, your aunts, your sisters, and grandmothers to get screened. Learn about the breast cancers that affect younger women. And gentlemen, you can get breast cancer too. About 4,000 men a year do get breast cancer. And so I would encourage you to get educated as well. Well, at this point, I'd like to hear how you feel about breast cancer health advocacy, any questions you have about breast cancer or health reform. So I'm happy to open this up for questions. Thank you very much.
Again, I'm Catherine Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Cancer Association of Anderson, and I'm proud to say we are a longtime beneficiary of the Komen affiliate that's been in the upstate. This year we're getting about $30,000 in funds from Komen that is used to help women go through their treatment. We pay for just really basic things like gas money to get to the doctor. And that's one of the questions I have for Jennifer is, what do you do about just the whole issue of access? There are cures out there that could cure people if they could just get there.
Well, that's why Komen did get involved in healthcare reform. We didn't endorse a particular bill. We didn't want to get involved in the partisan squabbling. But when we saw that there was a good chance that healthcare reform would occur, we got very involved in making sure that it would contain solutions to the very problem that you mentioned. So there's no question that there is a big problem around access to treatment.
What's going to happen now that the ball has been dropped?
Oh. It's the $20,000 question. You know, I think there was some very good thinking in the legislation, some overreaching. I hope that they will pick it apart and pull out those pieces that there really is consensus on. And I think there is a way to move forward in a bipartisan way.
Dr. Bryans, she alluded to the controversy over mammography and for women in their 40s. And I know that the National Breast Cancer Coalition has been saying, well, yeah, we've been saying that all along. In fact, they hand out flyers. It's an anti-shower card. Does everybody know what a shower card is? It's a little card you hang in the shower to show you how to examine your breast, and they say, get out of the shower. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that the American College of Radiology has the same kind of feeling that most radiologists do. We were very upset about the task force. We didn't feel that they included actually all of what we do when we're screening for breast cancer now. We felt like some of the statistics may have been manipulated a little bit. And that also, when you start off with the thought that it doesn't really matter that 16,000, 17,000 women may die, that is just an acceptable statistic for not screening, that's kind of a problem. And the fact that since 1990, screening mammography has helped to decrease the breast cancer mortality by up to 30%, I think is a better statistic. And the fact that we don't just do mammography anymore. We do breast ultrasound. We think that, and the task force also didn't think that clinical exam was important, and we really think that that's wrong. They didn't think that breast self-exam, or I think even the doctor's exam. Yeah. And we do targeted breast ultrasound, and we do breast MRI, and it's just so much more, I think, than just the old screening. We have digital mammography, which is so much better than film screen mammography used to be. So just highly disagree with that. And I think it's just kind of putting a target on whether your life is important or not.
That was the thing about the self-breast exam, I think, was what really got survivors up in arms, because we thought, you know, talk about a cheap health care cost, and this is free, right?
Should I explain a little bit about the controversy? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, please do that.
So what we've been talking about is this task force that is quasi-governmental. They are researchers from around the country, mainly epidemiologists, and they are supposed to give recommendations on different types of prevention. And so they published recommendations on mammography screening. And I think you'd have to be asleep to have missed it because it was so controversial. And one of the reasons it was so controversial, it was the way it was delivered. It was data that is incomplete, and it wasn't purposefully incomplete. There's data that we don't have that practitioners, like Dr. Bryans, know.
Mm-hmm.
It says a lot about the practice of medicine, because if you're going to look at statistics and then issue a report, you really need to do it in conjunction with people who are actually practicing medicine or people who are representing patients. You can't just issue a report and let the press be the ones disseminating it, because what the press focused on was the controversy. And the press made it seem like the task force was saying that mammography doesn't save lives. And actually, that's not what the task force said. And so what we tried to do was try to keep everyone calm and say, we don't agree with the task force. Women 40 to 49 should continue to get screened on a regular basis. But the truth is, mammography does save lives. The task force says that. And please continue to get screened. So I think it's a lesson to those. I met a woman here who is a professor and works on health promotion. Those of us in the public health arena, it was a real lesson about the danger of data and what you need to do to take the data and actually make it work for people and not let the press be the ones who are the first ones to run with it.
And I think it was released so that people really thought, well, this is the new This is it. This is what we should just follow from now on, and we don't even have to worry about getting mammograms until we're 50. Mm-hmm. And there are recommendations, and there have been changes sometimes in the age group and in the time limit, whether you should get yearly mammography, when you should start mammography. Mm-hmm. And the ACR has recently come out with some of their new recommendations, and it includes breast ultrasound, breast MRI, whether you have a genetic predisposition. It's not just, all comers and everybody that just needs to be screened. And there's some screening in different ways. And so just to release a pile of statistics and act like this is the way we should just do this is very dangerous, I think.
Could you go over what the recommendations are from radiologists?
Currently, they're still recommend getting a baseline mammogram between the ages of 35 to 40 if you don't have any extra family risk or potential for, there's something called the breast cancer gene. It's called BRCA, and there's a BRCA1 and a BRCA2. And that also tends to be if you have lots of people in your family that have had ovarian cancer, GI cancer. There's some other things that would make you suspicious. A mother or sister that had breast cancer before menopause. Those are all higher risk factors than the general population. And they recommend even that you may start with an earlier screen for that. And then yearly screening mammography after age 40 is the current recommendation. Now that's just if you have no symptoms. And there's different recommendations if you would have the symptom of a palpable lump or breast nipple discharge or some erythema of the breast, or the doctor or yourself feels something. That is when you get pushed from a screening mammogram into more of a diagnostic workup. And that's when extra imaging would be performed, such as a breast ultrasound. If you're a younger patient and you had dense breasts, we might go to the breast MRI, which is new technology which can actually see a little bit better. And so that's what, the current recommendations really haven't changed in terms of the American College of Radiology, and the American Cancer Society hasn't changed theirs either.
What about the idea of going every other year rather than every year?
Well, that may come up. Yeah. Initially, the original recommendations, and this was probably more in the late 90s, were that they recommended screening every other year between 40 and 49, and then starting every year at 50. And some of the statistics show that unfortunately the younger women tend to get the more aggressive cancers. So that was almost too long of a time period. And older women, not always, but tend to have less aggressive cancers. So that may switch at some point. But, excuse me, I think that they decided that it was a better interval to just go yearly and try to catch everyone, I think.
Komen agrees with that as well. In Europe, the standard is every other year, but the technology is not as good. They don't have digital mammography. They still use the analog. But Komen is also sticking with its recommendation of annual screens.
One thing that's been interesting to me since my diagnosis almost 10 years ago was I never thought that I was at really any risk because I didn't have much of a family history. Though the year after I got it, my mother got it, so I said, I gave it to her. Sorry, Mom. But there is most breast cancer comes out of nowhere, correct? Something like 85% of women.
Right, the gene is a very, very small pool of people.
Right, well, and what I try to tell people when they come in for their screening mammogram or there's something else done like a breast ultrasound, because people are confused about that. And I said, actually, you're at risk by being a woman and getting older. Yeah. The whole statistic of 1 in 8 women, I think, is really powerful to let people know that it's not something that you can not worry about, I guess, if there's no one in your family. You may be the first one that's diagnosed.
Yeah. When I was diagnosed, my youngest child was 11, a girl, and she said, you know, Mom, what's going to happen to me? Because I'll probably get this too. And I said, oh, don't worry, honey. By the time you're old enough to worry about, to be at risk, they'll have a cure. Was I lying?
We're working as hard as we can. And, Nancy Brinker has a great line. She says, we want to make the mastectomy the iron lung of breast cancer. And that's what I hope for my daughter, that we at least make major advances in treatment.
Well, we have at least come up with the fact that we're diagnosing, and I think the reason we've decreased the mortality rate so much is that we're diagnosing stage 0 cancer before it's even broken out of the ducts. So if we can get from that to, like any cancer, what causes it? Can we help with prevention? I think that's the next step.
And that's an interesting, like you mentioned that also. I went to the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, which is probably the largest scientific conference in the world on breast cancer in December. And the 2 big things that came up that were risk lifestyle factors were weight, which we know we've got a tremendous problem with in America, and drinking alcohol. So the women researchers who'd come up with that said they were the most unpopular people at the conference because no one wanted to hear that weight. How do we address that problem, though? If you could take a pill that would have the same impact as keeping your weight down, it would be the biggest innovation in years in breast cancer.
That would solve a lot of other problems.
A lot of other
we could make millions of dollars and not worry about things.
Right. But how do we get that word out that you can't?
I think it's a general health promotion. In fact, I have something that I tacked up on my bulletin board that was in the Wall Street Journal that has like 10 different diseases that exercise can minimize. And so far it's just sitting there getting wrinkled. But, but exercise, there is more and more evidence showing that not only breast cancer, but obviously we know heart disease and stroke, et cetera. Exercise is very important. And then
better nutrition as well, I think.
And better nutrition, yeah. And then also in terms of excessive drinking, there is a strong link between overuse of alcohol and breast cancer.
One of the interesting things, though, was that the women who, in the study, who did have a greater incidence of breast cancer because of drinking, they had less heart disease, so the mortality was the same at the end, and we all went, well, one or the other. Anyway, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Ms. Luray?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, Austin, do you have any closing comment you'd like to make or charge to the audience here? You've got a very attentive audience.
Well, one, I just, my hat's off to all of you in the room, survivors, family members of survivors, people who are just inspired by the fight against breast cancer. Thank you for all that you do. It's a legion of people who have brought about the changes that you saw in San Antonio, and even though we do have a problem of access to care, we're continuing to work on that. But it's the foot soldiers around the country really making that happen. And I hope to the students that you will consider a career in public service. It's incredibly rewarding, and I hope that you'll really think about it. You may not make as much money as if you went into business, but I think you'll have a lot of fun. And if you do go into business, you can do what Leo, who I met earlier, did and join a board a nonprofit board and use his business skills to keep the nonprofit organization healthy and active. Thank you so much for having me.
It was a wonderful panel, and thank you all very much. And Jennifer, we appreciate your visit to Clemson and the work that you're doing with the Komen Foundation.
Thank you
very
so
much.
Thank you.
And for all of you, please drive safely. And do you have a few minutes if they have questions?
Sure.
If you have a question, come on down. But thank you very much for the evening, and students, thank you very much.